Jorge Werner wiped the grease from his calloused hands, studying the engine before him with practiced focus. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal filled his nostrils as he worked in his modest garage on the outskirts of Willow Creek. 20 years of fixing cars had taught him that engines, unlike people, were honest in their brokenness. "Mr. Werner, how's my truck looking?" Bill Patterson called from the garage entrance, his weathered face creased with concern. Jorge straightened up, his broad shoulders tight from hours of hunching over engines. "Timing belt shot, Bill. Could have seized your engine if you'd waited another week." He gestured to the frayed belt on his workbench. "I'll have it fixed by tomorrow afternoon. You're a lifesaver, Jorge. Don't know what this town would do without you." As Bill left, Jorge's thoughts drifted to Nellie. Once, they dreamed of opening a chain of garages together. She'd handle the books while he'd train mechanics. But dreams cost money, and money had always been tight. Now, after 15 years of marriage, they barely spoke beyond discussing bills and groceries. The phone in his pocket buzzed. Another message from Nellie. "Working late again?" Jorge typed back. "Customer's truck needs fixing. Don't wait up." 3 doors down, in the recently renovated Victorian house, Nellie McKay Werner sat at her kitchen counter, staring at Jorge's message. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the marble surface as she composed a different text. "Miss you already. When can I see you again?" This message wasn't for Jorge. Kirk Reed's response came seconds later. "Tonight. The usual spot." Nellie glanced at the gold-framed wedding photo on the wall, guilt gnawing at her conscience. But Jorge had stopped seeing her years ago, too focused on his precious garage and other people's problems. Kirk made her feel alive again, desired. The real estate agent had swept into town 6 months ago like a fresh breeze, bringing promises of excitement and passion that had long since died in her marriage. In the living room, Susan Pope's sharp eyes tracked her daughter-in-law's movements. Jorge's mother had lived with them for 3 years now, watching as Nellie grew more distant and Jorge buried himself deeper in work. Susan's arthritic fingers clutched her coffee mug tightly. "Another late night at the garage?" Susan's voice dripped with disapproval. Nellie startled, quickly pocketing her phone. "You know Jorge. Always putting everyone else first." "At least he works for a living," Susan snapped. "Unlike some people who spend their days texting and shopping." Before Nellie could respond, her phone chimed with an email notification. Her heart skipped. It was from Marcia, her daughter. The wedding invitation she'd been dreading had finally arrived. The invitation's elegant script announced the union of Marcia Goodman and Roman Hewitt. Nellie forwarded it to Jorge without comment, knowing he'd be thrilled. Their daughter rarely visited anymore, claiming work kept her too busy. But Nellie knew better. Marcia had inherited her father's judgment of her mother's laziness. Later that evening, Jorge's trusted pickup truck sputtered as he drove home. He frowned at the unfamiliar sound but dismissed it as simple wear and tear. Unknown to him, Kirk had been there earlier, tampering with the fuel line under Nellie's guidance. They needed Jorge distracted, unable to attend the wedding. It was part of their larger plan. "You sure about this?" Kirk had asked as he worked under the truck. "Seems risky." "Just do it," Nellie had insisted. "Make it look natural." The same evening, at the Rusty Nail Bar, Kirk nursed his bourbon while regaling his drinking buddy Chuck Torres with tales of his conquest. "You should see how easy it is, Chuck. The guy's so wrapped up in his garage, he doesn't even notice his wife's been stepping out for months." Kirk's laughter echoed through the dimly lit bar. Chuck shifted uncomfortably. "Watch yourself, Kirk. Jorge Werner isn't someone you want to cross. I've seen him when he's angry. Man's got ice in his veins." "Please," Kirk scoffed. "The guy fixes cars for a living. What's he gonna do?" At home, Jorge found his mother waiting up for him. Susan's face was tight with tension as she cornered him in the kitchen. "That woman is going to destroy you," she hissed. "While you're out fixing everyone else's problems, your own house is falling apart." Jorge's jaw clenched. "Mother, I've told you before. My marriage is none of your business." "Everything in this house is my business," Susan retorted. "I live here too, remember? Or did you forget who helped you with the down payment?" Jorge's silence spoke volumes. He'd never forgotten the debt he owed his mother, but her constant criticism of Nellie grated on him. What he didn't know was that Susan had already confronted Nellie about Kirk. Earlier that day, Susan had cornered Nellie in the laundry room. "I know about your affair," she'd said coldly. "Either you help me get rid of Jorge, or I'll tell him everything." Nellie had gone pale. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me. I've seen you with that real estate agent. Jorge may be blind, but I'm not." Susan's smile was predatory. "Help me drive him out, and your secret stays safe. Cross me, and I'll destroy you both." Now, as Jorge lay in bed beside his sleeping wife, doubts crept in. Something felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Nellie's breathing seemed too measured, too careful. Was she really asleep? She wasn't. Behind her closed eyes, Nellie was planning her next move. Kirk had promised her a new life, away from Willow Creek's suffocating small-town mentality, away from Jorge's perpetual disappointment and Susan's venomous presence. All she had to do was play her part. The wedding was 2 weeks away. By then, everything would change. Jorge would be humiliated, broken. The garage would fail without his reputation to sustain it. And Nellie? She'd be free. But Nellie didn't know Jorge as well as she thought. In the darkness of their bedroom, his mind was already cataloging inconsistencies, noting patterns. Years of diagnosing engine problems had taught him to spot when something wasn't running right. And his marriage? It was making all the wrong noises. Tomorrow, he'd start digging. Not obviously, Jorge Werner didn't do obvious. He'd watch, wait, and gather evidence. Because if there was one thing Jorge knew with certainty, it was this: betrayal deserved no mercy. As dawn approached, 3 people lay awake in the Werner household, each plotting their own version of victory. But only one of them truly understood the stakes. Only one had the patience and ruthlessness to see it through to the bitter end. And Jorge Werner never lost a fight. Chapter 2: The Fall from Grace. The wedding venue gleamed under the afternoon sun as guests mingled on the manicured lawn. Inside, Marcia Goodman Hewitt's reception was in full swing, but her father was nowhere to be seen. Jorge's truck had died 20 miles outside town. He'd pulled over, tried to restart it, and finally called for a tow truck. Now, hours later, he strode through the venue's entrance, his face set in stone as he took in the scene before him. Tables were being cleared. Guests were finishing their drinks. And there, in the center of it all, stood Nellie and Susan, wine glasses in hand, twin smirks playing on their lips. "Oh, Jorge," Nellie called out, her voice carrying across the room. "You missed quite the ceremony. Someone else had to walk our daughter down the aisle." Jorge's fists clenched at his sides. The room fell silent as guests turned to watch the unfolding drama. Some whispered behind their hands. Others pretended to study their empty plates. "Funny thing about that truck of yours," Susan added, swirling her wine. "Guess you're not such a great mechanic after all." Jorge said nothing. His dark eyes swept the room, memorizing faces, noting who laughed and who looked away in shame. Near the back, Kirk Red stood with a glass of champagne, his arm draped possessively around a woman who wasn't Nellie. Marcia stepped forward, her wedding dress rustling. "Dad." Jorge turned and walked out. No explosion of anger, no heated words. Just silence, the kind that promised retribution. Roman Hewitt watched his new father-in-law leave, then turned to his bride. "Something's not right here, Marcia. Your mother's been acting strange all day." "What do you mean?" "She kept checking her phone during the ceremony, whispering with your grandmother." "And did you notice how they both smiled when we heard about your dad's truck breaking down?" Marcia's eyes narrowed. "Now that you mention it, Mom's been different lately. More secretive." Back at his garage, Jorge sat in the darkness, surrounded by tools and half-finished repairs. The humiliation burned in his gut, but he forced it down, channeling it into something colder, more focused. His phone buzzed repeatedly. "Nellie." "Jorge, let me explain." "Susan." "Don't be so dramatic." "Nellie, please come home." "Susan." "You're embarrassing yourself." He ignored them all. Chuck Torres slipped into the garage through the back door. "Jorge, you here, man? What do you want?" "Chuck, you need to know something." "About Kirk Reed." Chuck shifted nervously. "He's been running his mouth at the bar, bragging about Things? Jorge looked up, his eyes glinting in the darkness. Tell me everything. As Chuck spoke, Jorge's expression remained unchanged. But inside, pieces were falling into place. The late nights, the hushed phone calls, his mother's sudden interest in the garage's finances. Marcia arrived an hour later, clutching a crumpled receipt she'd found in her mother's purse. Dad, look at this. It's for parts. Parts that would fit your truck exactly. Jorge studied the receipt. Kirk Reed's signature was at the bottom. What are you going to do? Marcia asked. Nothing. Jorge's voice was quiet. Yet. The next few days brought whispers throughout Willow Creek. Some claimed Jorge had lost his mind, spending hours alone in his garage. Others swore he was planning to leave town. A few, those who knew him best, recognized the calm before the storm. Luther Snyder, Jorge's oldest friend, tried to warn Nellie. Whatever you've done, fix it now. I've known Jorge since high school. He doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. But Nellie was too far gone, drunk on Kirk's promises and her own delusions of escape. Jorge's weak, she told Susan. He'll cry, maybe drink a bit, then come crawling back. Susan wasn't so sure anymore. Something in her son's silence frightened her. Kirk, meanwhile, grew increasingly paranoid. He hired a private investigator to watch Jorge, but the PI reported nothing unusual. Just a man working in his garage, talking to old customers, living his life. But appearances deceived. Jorge was building something far more dangerous than engines now. He was constructing revenge, piece by careful piece. Chuck became his eyes and ears, reporting every movement Kirk and Nellie made. Marcia gathered evidence, using her position as their daughter to access information others couldn't. Even Roman helped, his business connections providing resources Jorge would need later. The betrayers thought they'd won. They believed Jorge's silence meant defeat. They never understood that a truly dangerous man doesn't announce his intentions, he simply acts. In his garage, Jorge sorted through decades of customer records, calling in old debts and favors. Each person who owed him became a weapon in his arsenal. Each betrayal he uncovered hardened his resolve. You should leave town, Chuck suggested one night. Start fresh somewhere else. Jorge looked up from his workbench, and Chuck stepped back at the cold fury in his friend's eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Jorge said softly. But they will. All of them. The plan was taking shape. Jorge knew Kirk's weaknesses now, his gambling debts, his shady real estate deals. He knew about Susan's secret accounts, filled with money stolen from local charities. And Nellie? Her betrayal would cost her everything. Because Jorge Werner understood something his enemies didn't. In Willow Creek, reputation was currency, and he was about to bankrupt them all. The first phase was already in motion. Anonymous tips about Kirk's business practices began circulating. Nothing concrete, just enough to make people nervous. Clients started asking questions. Deals fell through. Nellie noticed Kirk's increasing agitation but attributed it to normal stress. She didn't see the noose tightening around them both. Susan tried one last time to manipulate her son. You're making a fool of yourself, she told him. Everyone's talking about how pathetic you've become. Jorge looked at his mother, really looked at her. For the first time in years. You taught me an important lesson, Mother. Family should always come first. His smile made her blood run cold. I won't forget that. The stage was set. Jorge's enemies had played their hand, thinking him weak, believing him broken. They never saw that each insult, each betrayal, each mocking laugh only sharpened his purpose. Soon, they would understand exactly who they'd crossed. And by then, it would be far too late. Jorge Werner wasn't just planning revenge. He was preparing to destroy them so completely that their names would become cautionary tales in Willow Creek for generations to come. The war had begun, and Jorge never lost a fight. Chapter 3, Shadows of Deception. Chuck Torres nursed his beer at the Rusty Nail, watching Kirk Red work the room. The real estate agent's confident swagger made Chuck's stomach turn. Another round, my friend? Kirk clapped Chuck's shoulder. I'm celebrating a big sale. Chuck forced a smile. Sure thing. Hey, heard you're looking to expand your business. Always. Kirk leaned in, lowering his voice. Between us, I've got my eye on Werner's garage. Place would make a great development opportunity once he goes under. Really? Chuck kept his tone casual. Risky move. Jorge's got loyal customers. Kirk laughed. Had loyal customers. You should hear the rumors going around about his work lately. Amazing how fast a reputation can crumble. Chuck's hand tightened around his beer bottle. He'd known Jorge for 15 years, watched him build that garage from nothing. Now this smirking outsider thought he could just take it all away. What if someone wanted to invest? Chuck asked. Hypothetically speaking. Kirk's eyes lit up. Well, hypothetically, I might know about some interesting opportunities. As Kirk launched into his sales pitch, Chuck mentally recorded every detail. Later, in Jorge's garage, he'd repeat it all word for word. Across town, Nellie paced her kitchen, anxiety gnawing at her insides. Susan watched from her usual perch, sharp eyes missing nothing. Stop fidgeting, Susan snapped. You'll draw attention. I can't help it. Nellie checked her phone again. Jorge hasn't come home in 3 days. Good. Let him sulk. It makes our plan easier. Nellie spun to face her mother-in-law. What if we've gone too far? The wedding was one thing, but now nothing. Susan's voice cracked like a whip. You made your choice when you started sleeping with Kirk. Unless you want Jorge to learn about that? You wouldn't. Try me. Susan smiled thinly. Besides, Kirk's already set things in motion. Those rumors about Jorge's work? They're spreading faster than we hoped. In his office, Luther Snyder stared at his computer screen, guilt weighing heavy on his shoulders. He'd just forwarded Jorge's client list to Nellie, not knowing she'd use it to target his most loyal customers with whispers of shoddy work and cut corners. What have I done? Luther muttered. His phone buzzed. A text from Jorge. Need to talk. Come to the garage. Luther's hands shook as he drove to meet his friend. The garage lights were off, but Jorge's truck sat in the parking lot. Luther found him inside, working on an engine. Sit down, Luther. Jorge didn't look up from his work. Jorge, I can explain. You gave Nellie my client list. Jorge's voice remained steady. Now my customers are getting anonymous calls about brake failures and engine fires. Luther slumped. I didn't know what she'd do with it. She said she wanted to help with marketing. Marketing. Jorge finally looked at his friend. Tell me everything. Start with when they approached you. As Luther confessed, Jorge's expression never changed. He listened silently to how Nellie had manipulated their oldest friend, using Luther's financial troubles as leverage. I'll make it right, Luther promised. Whatever you need. Yes, Jorge agreed softly. You will. Meanwhile, at Roman and Marcia's new apartment, pieces of the puzzle were coming together. Look at this. Marcia spread documents across their dining table. Bank statements, text messages, emails. Mom's been planning this for months. Roman studied the evidence. Kirk's involved in everything. Property deals, loan applications, even insurance policies on the garage. They're trying to destroy Dad's business. Marcia's voice shook with anger. And Grandma's helping them. Question is, why? Roman tapped the papers thoughtfully. Your grandmother stands to lose her home if Jorge goes under. Unless. Marcia's eyes widened. Unless she's got something else lined up. Dad always said she was too proud to live on his charity. The next morning, Jorge received an unexpected visitor. Chuck arrived early, carrying a recording device. You need to hear this. Chuck played back his conversation with Kirk. He's planning to buy the garage once the bank forecloses. Already has investors lined up. Jorge listened without comment, his hands working steadily on a carburetor. Only the tension in his shoulders betrayed his fury. There's more. Chuck hesitated. Kirk's been laundering money through his real estate deals. That's how he's financing everything. Proof? Not yet. But I can get it. Jorge nodded once. Do it. The pieces were falling into place. Jorge now knew the full scope of their betrayal. Not just the public humiliation at the wedding, but the calculated destruction of everything he'd built. That night, he made 3 phone calls. First, to Marcia. Keep digging into your grandmother's finances. Focus on the charity accounts. Second, to Chuck. Tell Kirk you want to invest. Big money. Get him talking. Third, to Luther. Time to repay that debt. Here's what you're going to do. In her bedroom, Nellie jolted awake from a nightmare. She dreamed of Jorge standing over her, his eyes cold and empty. The dream Jorge hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. He just watched, patient as death. She reached for her phone, needing to hear Kirk's voice. But Kirk didn't answer. He hadn't answered all day, because Kirk was too busy dealing with sudden problems. Building inspectors showing up at his properties. Anonymous tips to the IRS. Loan applications mysteriously denied. It's Werner, Kirk told his lawyer. Has to be. Impossible, the lawyer replied. Guy's been holed up in his garage for days. Besides, how would a mechanic even know about these deals? But Jorge knew. Jorge had always known. While they thought him broken, he'd been building his own network of allies. Every betrayal they'd planned would be repaid tenfold. In the garage, Jorge closed his ledger. Phase 1 was complete. The evidence gathered, the players identified, the weaknesses found. Now came the real work. They tried to break him with public humiliation, tried to steal his business, his reputation, his dignity. They thought him weak because he fixed cars for a living. They forgot that every engine tells a story. And Jorge Werner had spent decades learning to read between the lines, to find the hidden flaws that brought even the strongest machines crashing down. Now he would apply to dismantling their lives, piece by piece, bolt by bolt, until nothing remained but ruins. The seeds of betrayal had been planted, but Jorge would be the one to harvest them. Chapter 4. The First Blow. The manila envelope arrived at Mayor Thompson's office unmarked, containing only a USB drive. Within hours, similar packages reached Pastor Davis at First Baptist Church and 3 prominent business owners in Willow Creek. Inside each envelope, photos of Kirk Reed and Nellie Werner in compromising positions, timestamps, hotel receipts, text messages, a masterpiece of destruction delivered without fingerprints. Mayor Thompson's secretary found him staring at his computer screen, face pale. "Cancel my lunch with Kirk Red," he ordered. In fact, cancel all future meetings with him. At First Baptist, Pastor Davis sat in his office, hands trembling as he dialed Kirk's number. The call went straight to voicemail. "Kirk, we need to discuss your position on the building committee." Immediately, Chuck Torres watched from his truck as Kirk sprinted from his real estate office to his car, phone pressed to his ear. He snapped a photo and sent it to Jorge with the caption. It started, "Inside Willow Creek Real Estate." Kirk's assistant Jennifer listened to him shout into his phone. "What do you mean they're backing out? The Morrison deal was solid." A pause. "Who sent what photos?" Jennifer pretended to type while recording everything on her phone. Another piece of evidence for Jorge's growing collection. At the local diner, Nellie sat alone in a corner booth, her coffee growing cold as she read text after text from former friends canceling lunch plans, book club meetings, charity committee positions. "More coffee, Mrs. Werner?" The waitress's tone dripped with judgment. "No, I should go." Nellie grabbed her purse, feeling eyes follow her to the door. She drove straight to Kirk's office, barging past Jennifer. "What's happening? Why isn't anyone speaking to me?" Kirk paced behind his desk, tie loosened, hair disheveled. "Someone sent photos. Us. Together. They're everywhere." "What? How?" Nellie sank into a chair. "Jorge wouldn't. He's not capable of." "Wake up, Nellie." Kirk slammed his hands on the desk. "Your husband's been playing us. Those mechanical problems he pretends to have? The quiet act? It's all been a show." In her kitchen, Susan Pope watched the drama unfold through her window as Nellie rushed home in tears. Her phone buzzed with messages from her charity board friends, all variations of the same theme. "We need to talk about the accounting discrepancies." Marcia sat in her new apartment, scrolling through social media as the scandal exploded across Willow Creek's digital grapevine. Roman brought her coffee, peering over her shoulder. "Your father's thorough," he remarked. "These photos, they tell a story. Not just the affair, but the planning, the deception. Dad always said the truth is the deadliest weapon." Marcia closed her laptop. He just needed the right moment to use it. At the Rusty Nail, Chuck nursed his usual beer, listening to conversations shift and change as news spread. Kirk's name became poison. Nellie's reputation shattered. And Jorge? He worked in his garage as always, fixing cars, solving problems, saying nothing. Luther Snyder walked into the bar, making straight for Chuck's table. "Did you know about the photos?" "Sit down, Luther." Chuck smiled. "Let me buy you a drink. We should talk about Kirk's interesting financial habits." Kirk's phone rang again, his biggest investor pulling out of 3 development projects. Then his bank calling about irregular transactions. The mortgage company questioning his loan applications. He tried calling Nellie, but she didn't answer. She sat in her parked car outside Jorge's garage, watching him work through the open bay door. He looked up once, met her eyes, and turned back to his engine. The dismissal hurt worse than any shouting could have. Pastor Davis called an emergency meeting of the building committee. "Kirk Reed's services will no longer be required," he announced. The vote was unanimous. Mayor Thompson's office issued a brief statement distancing the city from certain real estate developments under review for potential irregularities. Jennifer, Kirk's assistant, typed up her resignation letter, adding copies of certain suspicious documents to her insurance file. Jorge had suggested she keep records, just in case. At the charity board meeting, Susan arrived to find her nameplate missing from the table. "We've contacted an auditor," the chairwoman informed her. "And the police." The web tightened slowly, deliberately, each strand carefully placed to ensure no escape. Jorge's revenge wasn't just about exposure, it was about isolation. Cutting off support, removing allies, creating pressure until something broke. Kirk made his last stand at the Chamber of Commerce meeting. "These allegations are ridiculous. I've brought millions in development to this town. You need me." The room remained silent. In the back, Chuck recorded everything on his phone, adding to Jorge's collection of evidence. Nellie tried calling her few remaining friends. None answered. She drove to her daughter's apartment, but Marcia wouldn't open the door. "Mom." Marcia's voice through the intercom was flat. "I have nothing to say to you." Susan watched her carefully cultivated social status crumble. Charity friends crossed the street to avoid her. Her bridge club suddenly had no openings. The whispers about missing funds grew louder. Jorge kept working. Cars came in broken, left fixed. He answered calls, wrote invoices, lived his life. But his eyes never softened. His voice never warmed. He had become judgment incarnate, patient and merciless. At home, Nellie found divorce papers on the kitchen table. Not angry accusations or demands, just cold, legal documents splitting their assets. Her name was already forged on several papers, dated months back. A signature she'd never given, on papers she'd never seen. "How?" she whispered. "You're not the only one who can plan ahead," Jorge said from the doorway. His first words to her since the wedding. "Sign them. Or don't. It doesn't matter anymore." He left her there, staring at papers that would end their marriage. The same way she'd planned to end it, but on his terms now. Always his terms. Kirk's office grew quiet as clients vanished. Jennifer boxed up her things, leaving behind copies of documents Jorge had asked her to accidentally send to certain authorities. The IRS called. The bank called. Former investors called. Each conversation tightened the noose. Chuck played his part, buying Kirk drinks, listening to his increasingly desperate plans. "I can rebuild," Kirk slurred. "I just need time. Capital. You're still interested in investing, right?" "Sure, buddy." Chuck recorded everything. "Tell me more about these opportunities." The photos spread. The rumors grew. But they weren't rumors anymore. They were facts, carefully documented, strategically released. Jorge had learned from his enemy's tactics, improved upon them, turned them into weapons. Nellie realized too late what they'd awakened. Not the simple mechanic they'd mocked. Not the devoted husband they'd betrayed. But something colder, harder. A man who'd spent months planning their destruction while they celebrated their victory. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 5, Breaking Point. 2 weeks after the photos leaked, Kirk Red sat in his empty office, staring at property listings. Locations he'd planned to develop, now marked sold in bold red letters. Who bought them? He demanded over the phone. "No, I don't care about confidentiality agreements. These were my deals." The realtor's voice remained firm. "The new owner wants to remain anonymous." "And Mr. Reed?" "They paid cash." Kirk slammed the phone down, hands shaking. All around his office territory, prime real estate parcels were being snatched up. Each purchase blocked his expansion plans, drove up prices, killed potential deals. Across town, Nellie opened another bottle of wine, ignoring Susan's disapproving glare. The divorce papers sat unsigned on the coffee table, a constant reminder of Jorge's patience. He hadn't pushed, hadn't threatened. He didn't need to. Stop drinking and think, Susan snapped. We need to act now, before he takes everything. Nellie laughed bitterly. Act? How? You've seen what he's done to Kirk, to our reputations, to your precious charity positions. File a restraining order. Susan leaned forward, eyes glinting. Claim you fear for your safety. We can still paint him as the villain. No. Nellie took another drink. You haven't seen him up close lately, Susan. The way he looks at us, like we're already dead to him. You're pathetic. Susan grabbed her phone. If you won't do it, I'll tell him everything myself. About Kirk, about the truck, about... Tell me what, Mother? Both women froze. Jorge stood in the doorway, face expressionless. Neither had heard him come in. Susan recovered first. About how you're terrorizing your wife. Destroying innocent people's lives because your ego got bruised. Innocent. Jorge's voice could have frozen fire. Like the charity money you embezzled? Or Kirk's fraudulent loans? Or perhaps you mean Nellie's careful planning of my public humiliation. He placed a folder on the table next to the divorce papers. Sign them, Nellie. Or tomorrow the police get proof of your involvement in sabotaging my truck. Attempted vehicular manslaughter carries serious prison time. Nellie's wine glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor. At their apartment, Roman paced while Marcia watched. Your father's gone too far. The photos, the business deals, fine. But this systematic destruction, you want me to stop him? Marcia's voice held an edge. After what they did, I want you to consider the consequences. Roman ran his hands through his hair. Kirk's not the only one who'll suffer. What about his legitimate clients? The developments that would have helped the town? Don't. Marcia stood. Don't you dare defend them. They tried to destroy my father. Made him miss our wedding. Humiliated him in front of everyone. And now he's becoming just like them. The words hung between them like poison. Marcia grabbed her keys. I need air. She drove to Jorge's garage, finding him at his workbench. Roman thinks you're going too far. And you? I think they haven't suffered enough. Jorge nodded once. Roman's a good man. He sees the best in people. A pause. That's why he'll never understand men like me. Meanwhile, Kirk made one last desperate move. He contacted Luther Snyder, known around town as a man who could provide quick cash, for a price. I need $200,000, Kirk said. Today. Luther's smile didn't reach his eyes. Big number. Must be quite an opportunity. Guaranteed returns. Triple your money in 6 months. Interesting. Luther opened his laptop. Tell me more. In his garage, Jorge listened to the recorded conversation. Chuck sat nearby, adding notes to their evidence file. Luther played it perfectly, Chuck said. Got him to admit everything about the fraud scheme. Send copies to his bank, Jorge ordered. And the essay? What about Nellie's confession? About the truck? Hold it. That's leverage for something bigger. The next day, Kirk received a call about an exclusive investment opportunity. The voice on the phone mentioned huge returns, inside information, guaranteed profits. All he needed was liquid capital. Desperate men make stupid decisions. Kirk emptied his accounts, borrowed from dangerous people, sold everything he could. One big score to turn it all around. Jorge watched through his security cameras as Kirk dumped the cash in a briefcase, following instructions to the letter. The man's desperation was obvious in his shaking hands, his nervous glances. Nellie signed the divorce papers that evening, not because of Jorge's threats, though they were real enough, but because she finally understood the depth of her miscalculation. I never thought you had this in you, she whispered. No, Jorge agreed. You thought I was weak. That was your mistake. Susan tried one last power play. I'll go to the police. Tell them everything. Go ahead. Jorge's smile made her step back. Explain how you helped sabotage my truck. How you coordinated with Kirk to destroy my business. How you stole from charities. He stepped closer. I have proof of everything, Mother. Everything. So please, go to the police. I'll wait. Chuck called later with news. Kirk had taken the bait, invested everything in the fake opportunity. By morning, he'd discover all his money gone, transferred through untraceable accounts. He's finished, Chuck reported. Completely wiped out. Good. Jorge hung up, turning back to the engine he was repairing. Each turn of the wrench felt like another twist of the knife in his enemies' backs. They thought him simple because he worked with his hands, limited because he fixed cars for a living. They never understood that engines taught valuable lessons about revenge. Timing was everything. Pressure had to build slowly, and when the moment came, you had to be willing to destroy everything to achieve your goal. The web had tightened. Now it would strangle them all. Chapter 6. The Reckoning begins. Kirk Reed's scream echoed through his empty office as he stared at his bank balance. $0. The investment account number he'd been given led nowhere. His calls went unanswered. No, no, no. He tried another account. Empty. Another. Drained. His hands shook as he dialed Luther Snyder's number. Luther's voicemail greeted him. Out of town on business. Back in 2 weeks. The loan sharks would expect their first payment tomorrow. Kirk grabbed his keys, headed for the one person who might still help him, Nellie. But Nellie didn't answer her door. Through the window, he saw wine bottles scattered across the floor, drawers pulled open, clothes missing. On the kitchen table, divorce papers bore her signature. Susan Pope answered her phone on the third ring. What do you want? Everything's gone, Kirk gasped. The money, the investments, Jorge somehow. Don't say his name. Susan's voice shook. Don't call me again. Don't come here. Just disappear. She hung up, turning to find Jorge watching her from the doorway. Entertaining call, Mother? You've destroyed him, she spat. Happy now? Almost. Jorge held up a file. The charity board's forensic audit was very thorough. Interesting reading. Susan's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. I'm your mother. You stopped being my mother the day you helped them sabotage my truck. He placed the file on the table. The police will have this tomorrow unless you leave town tonight. Your choice. At the local paper, Chuck Torres submitted an anonymous tip about Kirk Reed's fraudulent real estate schemes. He included documents, bank records, witness statements, a masterpiece of investigative journalism served on a silver platter. This is dynamite, the editor breathed. How long have you been working on this? Chuck shrugged. Just connecting dots. Making sure justice gets served. Marcia watched the story break online, spreading across social media like wildfire. She showed Roman her phone. Still think Dad's going too far? Kirk made his own choices, Roman admitted. The fraud, the theft, that's on him. And Mom? Grandma? They chose their side. Roman pulled her close. Now they faced the consequences. Jorge's garage remained busy. He fixed cars, solved problems, built trust with each repair. The town's sympathy had shifted entirely to his side. The wronged husband who'd survived betrayal with dignity. They never saw the satisfaction in his eyes when Kirk's Mercedes was repossessed, or when Susan's charity friends filed criminal charges, or when Nellie's social circle shrank to nothing. The police interviewed him about Kirk's accusations. Jorge answered calmly, provided alibis, expressed appropriate concern. The detective left convinced of his innocence. Your husband's quite a man, she told Nellie later, standing up to harassment from his wife's lover. Very admirable. Nellie wanted to scream that Jorge was behind everything. The photos, the financial ruin, the calculated destruction of their lives. But she had no proof. He'd made sure of that. Chuck brought more news. Kirk had borrowed from dangerous people. They're looking for him. Not happy about missing payments. Make sure they find him, Jorge said. That's cold, man. So was sabotaging my truck. Kirk tried one last desperate move. He showed up at Jorge's garage after hours, drunk and swaying. You think you've won? Kirk slurred, stumbling through the open bay door. I made her happy. Something you never could. Jorge continued working on an engine, not bothering to look up. You should leave. Or what? You'll destroy me? Kirk laughed bitterly. Too late. I'm already ruined. Might as well take you with me. He lunged forward, grabbing a wrench from the workbench. Jorge moved with frightening speed, catching Kirk's wrist and twisting until the tool clattered to the floor. That was stupid, Jorge said softly, maintaining his grip as Kirk gasped in pain. Now I have assault charges to add to your problems. Chuck emerged from the shadows, phone recording everything. Got it all on video, boss. Jorge released Kirk, who crumpled to the ground. Get out. Next time, I'll let them find you. Kirk knew who they were. The lone sharks hunting him. He scrambled to his feet and fled into the night. Nellie packed her bags in silence, ignoring Susan's tirade about weakness and surrender. The divorce papers were signed. Her social life destroyed. No friends would take her calls. Even her own daughter refused to speak to her. This is your fault, Susan hissed. If you'd been stronger, filed the restraining order. Shut up. Nellie's voice cracked like a whip. You pushed for this. Convinced me Jorge was weak. Well, look who's weak now. She grabbed her suitcase. I'm leaving town. You should too, before he comes for you next. You can't just run. Watch me. At the police station, Detective Sarah Martinez reviewed the evidence against Susan Pope. Bank records. Witness statements. A paper trail of embezzlement spanning years. Mrs. Pope, Martinez said into her phone, we need you to come in for questioning. Susan's response was a clicked disconnection. Within an hour, she packed her essentials and booked a flight. Jorge sat in his garage office, watching 3 separate security feeds. Kirk stumbling down the street, Nellie loading her car, Susan rushing to pack. Chuck stood beside him, shaking his head in amazement. You broke them, Chuck said. Completely. They broke themselves. Jorge turned off the monitors. I just made sure they couldn't hide from the consequences. Marcia brought coffee later, finding her father working as always. Kirk tried to attack you? Predictable. Jorge accepted the cup. Weak men always resort to violence when they're cornered. Mom's leaving town. I know. Grandma too. Jorge nodded once. Good. Marcia studied her father's face. Will it be enough? Their punishment? It's not about enough. Jorge met her eyes. It's about making sure they can never hurt us again. That no one in Willow Creek ever forgets what happens to people who mistake patience for weakness. Roman called Chuck later that night. Is it over? Almost. Chuck watched another security feed showing Kirk trying to pawn his Rolex. Your father-in-law's thorough. They won't recover from this. Good. Roman paused. Tell Jorge. Tell him I understand now. What had to be done? The next morning, Jorge opened his garage as usual. Customers brought their cars. He fixed them. Life continued. But something had changed in Willow Creek. People spoke of Jorge Werner differently now, with respect tinged with fear. They'd seen what happened to those who crossed him, how completely he could destroy his enemies while appearing to do nothing at all. 3 lives lay in ruins. A wife who thought him weak. A mother who betrayed her son. A man who dared steal what wasn't his. Jorge's revenge was complete, not with violence or public confrontation, but with careful, calculated destruction. He'd taken everything, their money, their reputations, their dignity, left them with nothing but the knowledge that they'd brought it all on themselves. The garage stayed open late that night. Jorge worked on engines, solved problems, lived his life. If he felt satisfaction at his victory, his face didn't show it. He taught them all a valuable lesson. Never mistake a man's quiet nature for weakness. Never assume that because he works with his hands, he can't devise a plan to destroy you. And never, ever betray Jorge Werner. Chapter 7. The Final Blow. Kirk Reed huddled in a cheap motel room on the outskirts of town, jumping at each passing car sound. 3 days without sleep had left him haggard, his designer clothes wrinkled and stained. His phone buzzed, another blocked number. He answered with trembling hands. Mr. Red, a gravelly voice said. About that money you borrowed. I'll pay, I swear. I just need time to... Time's up. Boss wants his money. Today. The line went dead. Kirk threw the phone against the wall, watching it shatter like his life had. A knock at his door made him freeze. Through the peephole, he saw 2 men in dark suits. Not the loan sharks, worse. Federal agents with a warrant for his arrest. Across town, Marcia sat in her father's garage office, reviewing the latest reports. The feds finally moved on Kirk's real estate fraud. They're calling it a multimillion-dollar scheme. Jorge nodded, hands steady as he cleaned a spark plug. Anonymous tips are useful things. That's not all. Marcia pulled up another email. Mom's bank accounts are frozen. All of them. Even the secret one she thought nobody knew about. Interesting timing. Dad. Marcia's voice softened slightly. She's broke. No money, no friends, no future here. Jorge placed the spark plug aside, fixing his daughter with an unblinking stare. Are you asking me to show mercy? No. I'm saying your revenge worked. She's destroyed. Not quite. Jorge picked up another spark plug. She needs to understand why. They all do. In her empty house, Nellie stared at her credit card being declined for the fourth time. The grocery store cashier's pitying look burned worse than any insult. I can put these back, Nellie mumbled, abandoning her cart of basic necessities. She walked home, past former friends who crossed the street to avoid her, past the beauty salon where she'd spent countless hours gossiping, past the church where she'd once headed multiple committees. All gone now. All doors closed. Her phone rang, the bank manager wanting to discuss irregularities in her accounts. More of Jorge's work, she knew. He dismantled her life with the same precision he used to fix engines. Susan faced her own reckoning at the Willow Creek police station. Detective Martinez laid out documents showing years of charity fraud. We can do this the easy way, Martinez said. Tell us everything, and maybe we can work something out. Susan's lawyer shook his head frantically, but she was already talking. It was Kirk's idea initially. He needed clean money for his developments. I wanted, more than your son could give you? Susan's face crumpled. Jorge was always so common. A mechanic. I deserved better than living on his charity. And now? Now I have nothing. Chuck brought the recording to Jorge that evening. Your mother sang like a bird. Implicated Kirk in money laundering, tax fraud, everything. Send copies to the FBI, Jorge ordered. Let them add it to their case. What about Nellie? She's been asking around for jobs, but nobody will hire her. Good. Chuck studied his friend's face. You're not done yet, are you? They betrayed me, Chuck. Humiliated me. Tried to take everything I built. Jorge's voice remained calm, controlled. The legal system can have Kirk. Poverty can have Nellie. But I want them to remember why this happened. I want them to understand exactly who they crossed. At the federal courthouse, Kirk's arraignment painted a picture of breathtaking fraud. Properties that didn't exist. Investors who'd lost millions. Money laundering through charitable organizations. The prosecutor read Susan's statement, detailing Kirk's role in corrupting the charities. Kirk's face went ashen as he realized. Jorge had orchestrated everything. Each charge, each piece of evidence, meticulously gathered and preserved. How do you plead? The judge asked. Kirk stared straight ahead. Guilty. No deals. No reduced charges. Just surrender in the face of overwhelming evidence. The news hit Willow Creek social media like a bomb. Screenshots of bank records. Photos of fake properties. Witness statements about Kirk's schemes. Nellie saw her name mentioned repeatedly, not as a target of investigation, but as a willing participant in the humiliation of a respected business owner. Her affair with Kirk became a footnote to his larger crimes. She tried calling Marcia again. What do you want? Her daughter demanded. I don't have anywhere else to turn. Like Dad didn't have anywhere to turn when you and Kirk sabotaged his truck? When you humiliated him at my wedding? Please, Marcia. I'm your mother. No. Marcia's voice could have frozen flame. You lost that right when you chose Kirk over your family. When you helped destroy the man who gave you everything. The line went dead. Susan watched federal agents cart away boxes of charity records. Her social circle had evaporated. Her reputation, built over decades of manipulating people and situations, lay in ruins. She called Jorge one last time. Was it worth it? He asked when she'd finished begging. Helping them try to break me? I'm still your mother. No. You're just another person who thought I was weak because I work with my hands, because I fix things instead of destroying them. A pause. Goodbye, Mother. Chuck found Kirk at the Rusty Nail, drunk and ranting. It's not fair. I had everything planned. The garage would have made a perfect development. Jorge was supposed to break. Instead, you broke. Chuck recorded everything on his phone. Funny how life works out. He's just a mechanic. A nobody who got lucky. No. Chuck's voice hardened. He's the man who taught this town what happens when you mistake patience for strength. When you think someone's simple because they work for a living. He sent the recording to Jorge, adding another piece to the collection. Evidence of Kirk's true nature, preserved for posterity. Nellie made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. She went to the garage after hours. Jorge watched her approach on the security cameras. She looked smaller somehow, defeated. I didn't know, she said when he opened the door. About the fraud, the money laundering. I just wanted more than a mechanic could give you. Jorge, please. I have nothing left. Now you understand. He turned back to his work. How it feels to lose everything. To be humiliated. To realize too late who you're dealing with. She left without another word, finally grasping the magnitude of her mistake. They'd all underestimated him, thinking his quiet strength was weakness. His patience, stupidity. His focus on work, a lack of ambition. Now they understood. Jorge Werner didn't need schemes or fancy words. He built things, fixed broken machines, and when necessary, he could dismantle lives with the same precise, ruthless efficiency. The lesson was complete. The price, paid in full. Chapter 8. Healing Wounds. Jorge's garage teemed with customers, each car representing trust rebuilt, faith restored. He moved between vehicles with focused intensity, teaching young mechanics the skills he'd mastered over decades. Watch the timing, he instructed Tommy, a 19-year-old apprentice. Engines tell you when something's wrong. You just have to listen. Marcia watched from the office, remembering when she played here as a child. The garage had always been her father's sanctuary. Now it was becoming something more, a symbol of resilience. Roman arrived with lunch, kissing his wife's cheek. How's the program going? Dad's got 3 new apprentices learning basic repairs. 2 more starting next week. Marcia smiled. The waiting list keeps growing. People trust him more than ever. After everything that happened, they saw his strength, Marcia finished. Not just in destroying his enemies, but in rebuilding afterward. Chuck burst in, waving a newspaper. You seen this? Kirk took a plea deal. 20 years minimum, full restitution to his victims. Jorge barely looked up from his work. The evidence was comprehensive. That's not all. He tried telling the feds about you, claiming you set him up, destroyed his business, and Chuck grinned. They didn't believe him. Not with all the documentation showing his fraud. The fake properties, the money laundering, everything. Facts don't lie, Jorge said simply. Neither do engines. Across town, Nellie cleaned rooms at the highway and motel. From luxury car to bus rides. From charity galas to changing sheets. The fall had been spectacular. Mrs. Werner? Her supervisor called. Phone call. Nellie's heart leaped, until she heard the detective's voice. We need to discuss the truck incident, Martinez said. New evidence has emerged about the sabotage. In her small apartment, Susan Pope watched her savings dwindle. The charity board had sued for restitution. Her Social Security barely covered rent. The phone rang. Another reporter wanting comments about Kirk's conviction, about her role in the fraud, about how she'd helped destroy her own son's reputation. She let it ring. At the garage, Jorge reviewed applications for his training program. Each folder represented someone seeking a second chance, someone willing to work, to learn, to build rather than destroy. You're changing lives, Roman said, studying the stack of papers. These people, they see hope here. Jorge's expression remained neutral. They see honest work. Something Kirk and Nellie never understood. And your mother? Susan Pope made her choice. Jorge's tone brooked no argument. She's no longer my concern. Marcia organized the next day's schedule, marveling at how the garage had grown. New equipment filled the bays. Apprentices learned at each station. The waiting room stayed full. We need to expand, she told her father. Maybe by the lot next door? Already done. Jorge handed her the deed. Signed the papers this morning. The property Kirk had once coveted for development would become part of Werner's garage. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Chuck brought more news over coffee. Nellie's being questioned about the truck sabotage. Susan, too. They're turning on each other, trying to avoid charges. Let them. Jorge's voice held no emotion. The truth will come out. You've had the evidence all along, haven't you? Evidence is like tools. You save them until they're needed. Roman found Marcia in their apartment that evening, looking through old family photos. Pictures of happier times, before greed and betrayal shattered everything. You miss her? He asked softly. I miss who I thought she was. Marcia put the photos away. But Dad was right. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Jorge worked late, as usual. Each repair represented more than fixed metal. It was trust restored, faith rewarded. His customers understood now. In Willow Creek, Jorge Werner's word meant something. The security cameras showed Nellie driving past again, slowing near the entrance. She didn't stop, didn't try to enter, just drove on, disappearing into the night. She's been doing that all week, Chuck reported. I know. Jorge didn't look up from his work. Thinking about forgiveness? No. The word fell like a hammer blow. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. The lesson had been learned. Jorge Werner wasn't weak because he worked with his hands. Wasn't simple because he fixed engines. Wasn't defenseless because he lived quietly. He was a man who understood how things worked, how to repair what was broken, and when necessary, how to break things beyond repair. The garage stood as his testament, his legacy, a place where honest work still meant something. Kirk Reed's fraud conviction made national news. Susan Pope's charity embezzlement became a cautionary tale. Nellie's fall from grace served as a warning. But Jorge? He simply worked, built, taught others to do the same. Because the strongest men don't need to prove their power. They simply use it when required. Chapter 9. A Brighter Tomorrow. The renovated Werner's garage sprawled across 3 lots, its fresh paint and expanded facilities drawing attention from passing traffic. Inside, Jorge moved between repair bays, checking his apprentices' work with practiced eyes. Timing's off, he told one young mechanic. Listen to the engine. It'll tell you what's wrong. Marcia sat in the new office suite, finalizing plans for her wedding. This time, everything would be different. This time, her father would walk her down the aisle. The ceremony setup is ready, Roman reported, bringing her coffee. The main bay will transform into a reception hall. Local paper wants to cover it, calling it Willow Creek's social event of the year. Dad's idea to have it here? Mine, actually. Roman smiled. Seems fitting. This place. It's more than a garage now. Outside, Chuck supervised the delivery of new diagnostic equipment. The expansion had turned Werner's garage into the largest repair facility in 3 counties. Business keeps growing, he told Jorge. People drive from 2 towns over just to get your opinion on their cars. Jorge nodded, watching his apprentices work. Each one represented a future builder, not a destroyer. Someone who understood the value of patient, skilled labor. A familiar car drove past, Nellie, making her daily circuit. She never stopped anymore. Just drove by, looking at what she'd lost. Still checking up on you, Chuck observed. Let her look. Jorge turned back to his work. She needs to remember. The wedding preparations continued. Local businesses competed for chances to participate. The same people who'd once whispered about Jorge's humiliation now sought his approval. Funny how things change, Roman remarked to Marcia. A year ago, they thought Dad was weak. Marcia checked another item off her list. Now they understand strength isn't about fancy suits or smooth talk. Jorge's training program had gained regional attention. Other garages sent apprentices to learn. Community colleges asked about partnerships. You've built something extraordinary, Roman told his father-in-law. I fix things. Jorge's response was characteristic in its simplicity. Cars. Lives. Doesn't matter. Work is work. But they all knew it was more than that. The garage had become a symbol of redemption for some, of consequences for others. Kirk's conviction had shocked the state's business community. The fraud scope, once revealed, staggered investigators. His promised appeal went nowhere, buried under mountains of evidence. Susan lived alone in a small apartment 2 towns over. Her attempts to contact Jorge met silence. She'd chosen her side, chosen wrong, and paid the price. The wedding day arrived bright and clear. Jorge's apprentices had transformed the garage. White chairs filled the main bay. Flowers and ribbons softened the industrial space. Marcia found her father in his office, already dressed in his suit. Ready? Almost. He handed her an envelope. Wedding present. From the garage accounts. Inside, Marcia found stock certificates. Ownership shares in Werner's garage. Dad, you helped rebuild it, Jorge said simply. It's yours too now. The ceremony began. Jorge walked his daughter down the aisle, past gathered friends and respected colleagues. No sign of Nellie. No trace of Susan. Their absence felt right, a clean break with the past. Roman's vows spoke of trust and understanding. Marcia's mentioned strength and loyalty. Jorge watched from the front row, his face revealing nothing, but his eyes never leaving his daughter. At the reception, Chuck raised a toast. To Werner's garage, where we learned that true strength isn't about what you destroy, but what you build. Guests who'd witnessed Jorge's humiliation a year ago now celebrated his triumph. They understood now. Understood that quiet men could be dangerous men. That patience didn't equal weakness. The garage's security cameras caught Nellie watching from across the street. She didn't approach, didn't try to interfere, just watched her daughter's happiness from a distance, the only view she'd earned the right to have. Jorge noticed but said nothing. Some lessons needed no words. The celebration continued into evening. Jorge's apprentices proudly showed off the facility to guests. The garage's transformation from humble repair shop to respected institution was complete. What now? Chuck asked as the party wound down. Jorge surveyed his domain. The expanded garage, the new apprentices, the legacy he'd built from betrayal's ashes. Now we keep building, he replied. Some people destroy. We fix. We create. We teach. Later that night, after the guests had gone, Jorge sat in his office reviewing applications for the next training class. Each folder represented someone seeking knowledge, wanting to learn honest work. Roman found him there. The party's over. You should head home. Soon. Jorge set aside another application. Just finishing up. You know, Roman said carefully, Kirk's lawyer reached out again. Says he wants to apologize. Make amends. Jorge's hands stilled. Some things can't be fixed. And Nellie? She's been asking about seeing Marcia. That's Marcia's choice. Jorge's voice held no emotion. She's learned about consequences. About loyalty. The next morning, Jorge opened the garage as usual. Customers brought their cars. Apprentices learned their trade. Life moved forward. Chuck arrived with coffee and news. Remember those loan sharks Kirk borrowed from? They found him in prison. He's in the infirmary now. Jorge nodded once, returning to his work. He hadn't arranged that particular punishment, but he wouldn't mourn it either. Marcia and Roman left for their honeymoon, but the garage's momentum continued. Jorge's training program expanded. New equipment arrived. The Werner name became synonymous with excellence and integrity. Susan made one final attempt at contact, sending a letter filled with justifications and excuses. Jorge added it to his evidence file without reading it. Some betrayals marked the soul too deeply for forgiveness. The security cameras caught Nellie's last drive-by. She paused longer this time, studying the garage's transformation. Then she pulled away, disappearing from Willow Creek and Jorge's life forever. You've won, Chuck said, watching her go. Completely, totally won. It was never about winning. Jorge picked up a wrench. It was about justice. About teaching them that quiet men aren't weak men. That working with your hands doesn't make you simple. He moved to the next car, the next repair, the next lesson, because that's what strong men did. They built things, fixed things, created legacies that outlasted revenge. Werner's garage stood as testament to that truth. A place where betrayal had been answered not just with destruction, but with creation. Where a man's strength showed not in his words, but in his works. Jorge Werner had taught Willow Creek an unforgettable lesson. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Never assume that because someone fixes broken things, they can't break you in return. But most importantly, he'd shown that true power isn't in destruction. It's in what you build from the ruins of betrayal. The garage doors stayed open. Cars came and went. Lives were changed. And Jorge Werner remained what he'd always been. A man who fixed things, who built things, who understood that sometimes the strongest response to betrayal isn't fury, but patient, ruthless, constructive revenge. Inside his office, Jorge hung a new sign. Simple black letters on white. Werner's Garage, Building Futures, one repair at a time. Below it, invisible but understood by all who knew the story, lay an unspoken warning. Never betray a man who understands how things break. Epilogue. The Legacy of Strength. 10 years later, Werner's Automotive Academy sprawled across what had once been 3 city blocks in Willow Creek's industrial district. The original garage still stood at its heart, preserved as a reminder of where everything began. But now it was surrounded by modern training facilities, diagnostic centers, and specialized repair shops. Jorge Werner, his hair now streaked with gray, walked through the main training hall where 30 students practiced engine repairs. At 62, he moved with the same purposeful strength that had defined him a decade ago. Time hadn't softened him. It had only reinforced the lessons he'd taught Willow Creek about patience, power, and consequences. "Grandfather," a young voice called out. 8-year-old James Werner Hewitt ran between the workbenches, carefully avoiding the tools and equipment he'd been taught to respect since he could walk. Jorge's expression remained stern, but his hand settled on his grandson's shoulder with gentle strength. "Showing your friend the shop?" Behind James, another boy followed more hesitantly. "My dad says you're the best mechanic in 3 states, Mr. Werner. Your father's car." Jorge nodded. "The BMW with the transmission problem. Tell him it'll be ready tomorrow." The children's presence highlighted the changes time had brought. Werner's was no longer just a garage. It had become an institution, the largest automotive training center in the region, teaching everything from basic repairs to advanced electronic diagnostics. Marcia emerged from the administrative wing, now the academy's director of operations. Motherhood and success had added confidence to her bearing, but she still carried herself with the same alertness that had helped her father execute his revenge a decade ago. "Dad," the trade school association called. "They want you to give the keynote at their national conference." Jorge continued watching his students work. "Send Roman. They specifically asked for you." After what happened with the Mitchell case. The Mitchell case had made national news 6 months ago. A major dealership chain caught defrauding customers, exposed by evidence gathered using techniques Jorge had developed. His methodology for documenting automotive fraud had become standard practice in consumer protection circles. Chuck Torres, now Werner's head of security, approached with his tablet. "That reporter's here again. Wants to do a story on the Werner method of automotive forensics." "No interviews," Jorge said flatly. The media had tried for years to get the full story. How a small-town mechanic had transformed personal betrayal into an empire built on exposing fraud and teaching honest work. They sensed there was more to the tale, but the principal players remained silent. Kirk Reed's name occasionally surfaced in cautionary business seminars. Released after 8 years, he'd tried starting over in another state. But Jorge's network ran deep. No bank would touch him. No investor would return his calls. He eventually took a job as a dishwasher in a roadside diner, his smooth talk and ambitious schemes reduced to bitter mutterings over a sink of dirty plates. Nellie had disappeared into obscurity. The last anyone heard, she worked as a hotel housekeeper in Nevada. She tried contacting Marcia when James was born, sending a card and small gift. They were returned unopened. Susan Pope had died 3 years ago in a state-run nursing home. Jorge didn't attend the funeral. Her only acknowledgement was a small donation in her name to the charity she'd once defrauded, a final, subtle reminder of her crimes. "The new diagnostic center opens next week," Marcia reported, following her father through the facility. "The governor wants to attend the ceremony." Jorge nodded. The center represented the academy's latest expansion, a state-of-the-art facility for training mechanics in hybrid and electric vehicle repair. Another step forward, another piece of the legacy. Roman managed the business side now, turning Werner's reputation for integrity into a nationwide certification program. Garages across the country paid premium fees to earn the Werner seal of approval. The standards were ruthlessly high, the inspections uncompromising. Like you always said, Roman had told Jorge, trust is earned through actions, not words. Chuck's security team did more than protect the academy. They maintained Jorge's information network, keeping tabs on potential fraud schemes and automotive scams. Werner graduates often helped, reporting suspicious patterns they encountered in their work. That parts supplier in Memphis, Chuck mentioned, the one running counterfeit components? Our people found documentation. Send it to the FBI, Jorge instructed. Through the usual channels. The usual channels had become well-worn paths over the years. Jorge's evidence packages were legendary among federal prosecutors, comprehensive, meticulously organized, impossible to dispute. He'd learned from destroying Kirk that properly documented proof was more devastating than any threat. James tugged at his grandfather's sleeve. Can I show Tommy the engine you're rebuilding? The one from the race car? In the private workshop Jorge maintained, a 1960s Ferrari engine sat partially disassembled. He still worked with his hands, taking on special restoration projects that interested him. The waiting list for his personal attention stretched years long. Careful, he told the boys. Look, don't touch. Watching his grandson's fascination with machinery, Jorge saw the future taking shape. James had inherited his mother's sharp mind and his grandfather's focus. More importantly, he understood early the lessons about strength and patience that Jorge had paid such a high price to learn. The academy's apprentice break room filled with students grabbing lunch. Young men and women in Werner-branded uniforms discussed diagnostic techniques and repair procedures. Many came from troubled backgrounds. Jorge had made a point of offering scholarships to those seeking second chances. Like you gave me, Tommy Chun, one of his first apprentices, now head of the electric vehicle program, had said. You taught us that fixing things is about more than just engines. The afternoon brought a video call from the FBI's Automotive Crimes Division. Another fraud case, another request for Jorge's expertise. His reputation had grown beyond mere mechanics. He was now considered the foremost expert in documenting and prosecuting automotive-related crimes. The evidence has to be perfect, he'd told his students countless times. Like engines, justice doesn't run on maybes. Marcia found him later in his office, reviewing student evaluations. The walls held photos of graduating classes, certificates of achievement, industry awards. But in his desk drawer, he kept other documents, the evidence file from 10 years ago. A reminder of why he'd built all this. Tommy's boy shows promise, Jorge commented. Good hands. Pays attention. Like his teacher. Marcia smiled. You know, Kirk tried reaching out again. Through his sister this time. Jorge's expression didn't change. No. Some wounds didn't heal. Some betrayals didn't deserve forgiveness. The lesson he'd taught Willow Creek still stood. Quiet men weren't weak men. And true strength lay in building something lasting from betrayal's ashes. The academy had grown far beyond revenge. It represented everything Kirk, Nellie, and Susan had never understood about Jorge. His patience, his precision, his dedication to doing things right. They'd seen a simple mechanic. He'd shown them, and the world, what that really meant. Evening found Jorge in the original garage bay, teaching his grandson basic tool handling. James absorbed everything with the same intense focus that had once helped his grandfather plan the destruction of his enemies. Why do we fix things, grandfather? Because breaking is easy, Jorge replied. Any fool can break things. Building takes strength, skill, patience. The lesson wasn't just about engines. James was learning early what his grandfather had taught an entire town, that true power isn't in quick destruction, but in the patient, precise application of knowledge and will. Chuck brought the day's security reports. Another Kirk Reed sighting, another desperate attempt to rebuild his reputation. But Jorge's influence in the automotive world had become absolute. No one would risk their Werner certification by dealing with known frauds. He never learned, Chuck observed. Some people don't, Jorge agreed. That's why we teach the ones who can. The academy's evening classes filled with working adults seeking better futures. Jorge walked through occasionally, observing their progress. Each student represented a potential ally in his ongoing mission to expose and prevent automotive fraud. "Your father changed the industry," one instructor told James. Before him, consumers had no real protection against sophisticated repair scams. Now everyone knows, you can't hide fraud from someone who really understands how things work. The next generation of Werner mechanics would carry forward more than just technical skills. They inherited a philosophy built on patience and the understanding that true strength reveals itself through creation, not destruction. As night fell over the academy, Jorge stood in his private workshop, hands moving with practiced skill over the Ferrari engine. Each component represented decades of engineering evolution, each repair requiring perfect understanding. Marcia found him there, like she had so many nights over the years. "Dad? Roman's taking James to the go-kart track tomorrow. Wanna come?" Jorge nodded once, focused on his work. The invitation represented what he'd gained by losing everything. A daughter who understood strength, a grandson to carry on his legacy, a reputation built on integrity rather than fear. The security cameras still ran constantly, monitored by Chuck's team. Old habits died hard, but they showed a different story now. Not enemies plotting destruction, but students learning creation. Not betrayal being planned, but futures being built. Werner's Automotive Academy stood as testament to a truth Jorge had learned through pain. Revenge serves best when it creates something stronger than what was lost. His enemies had tried to destroy him, thinking him weak because he worked with his hands. He'd shown them, and the world, that those hands could build an empire. The next morning would bring more students, more challenges, more opportunities to reinforce the lessons he'd taught Willow Creek. Jorge Werner remained what he'd always been, a man who fixed broken things and taught others to do the same. But anyone who knew the whole story understood the warning built into the Academy's very existence. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Never assume that because someone works with their hands, they can't reshape the world. The garage lights dimmed, but the legacy burned bright. In classrooms and workshops across the country, Werner-certified mechanics carried forward the principles Jorge had forged in Betrayal's fire. James would inherit more than just a business empire. He'd inherit the truth at its foundation. That revenge, properly executed, doesn't end with destruction. It ends with creation, with something stronger and more lasting than what was lost. The security camera caught Jorge leaving for the night, his posture still straight, his movements still purposeful. Time hadn't weakened him. It had only proven what his enemies learned too late, that the most dangerous men are the ones who understand how things break, and more importantly, how to build something better from the pieces. Chuck locked up behind them. Another day complete at the institution that had grown from one man's response to betrayal. The Werner name now stood for something bigger than revenge. It represented excellence, integrity, and the kind of strength that builds rather than destroys. But in Willow Creek, people still told the story in whispers. About the quiet mechanic who turned betrayal into an empire. About the price of underestimating a man who understands how things break. And in the Academy's heart, the original garage stood preserved, a reminder that strength isn't measured in loud words or quick violence, but in the patient, precise application of knowledge and will. Jorge Werner had taught that lesson well, and his legacy would ensure it was never forgotten. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.